Hey Horace, how you doing, mate?
Good day, Rob. Doing very well. How are you?
I'm good. It is I know with podcasts you're not meant to date when time is, but it is February and it's freezing in the UK.
Really?
No, apparently not, because then obviously it kind of loses its appeal in 30 years' time when people are like, oh, that Rob guy who did a podcast, oh, this is an old one. Don't bother with that, right?
Yeah,
Um,
right. Because it's all about freshness these days. But if it ever gets uncovered in the time capsule, that date you just gave to it is going to be
mhm.
super valuable. We're going to be in a museum one day.
I kind of already feel like I'm in a museum, but it's fine. Um, so, for the benefit of our listeners, as we mentioned before we kind of recorded, I did a Legal Tech 101 podcast during lockdown for my sanity. And now moving forward, I'm very keen to start one around founders, right? Because I think previously what we've seen before, as we mentioned, is we all go to conferences, we all spend a lot of money at those conferences, so we're all kind of very customer centric, right? Because the powers that be and marketing are all about the ROI, what we get from those things, right? So moving forward, we're kind of keen to speak to, especially legal tech being such a thriving um, kind of entrepreneurial world these days, and I think, and we'll get into it with you, but um, for the benefit of the listeners, do you mind just giving me a bit of background to yourself, Horace?
Oh, would love to. My name is Horace. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Cynthia. I used to be a lawyer once upon a time, spent a lot of my life negotiating and drafting contracts. And around about 5.5 years ago, I left private practice and started running technology startups. So, Cynthia is my second one. And what we do is we turn contract into reliable and reusable data. And as well as that, a few applications that stack on top of this data to make use of it in different use cases. Things that are really tailored to help lawyers solve problems that they faced mostly in the transactional space, because that's where my background is.
Mm-hmm. No, it's good to know. I mean, my first question, right, and I think I'll probably ask everyone this, is what why do you think that lawyers make good entrepreneurs?
Oh, I don't know if lawyers make good entrepreneurs.
Do you not? Because the reason why I ask that is that a lot of the people that we will speak to come from a lot of background. So do you think rather than less than them being an entrepreneur, it's more of the frustration on them doing 11,000 hours of doc review breaks people and they're like, there must be a better way? Or
There
why do you
must be a
think
better
it comes
way.
from that?
I think lawyers make good technical domain experts who just happen sometimes to be entrepreneurs for legal tech. I know several lawyers who have gone on to be CEOs of companies, but I think it's a relatively rare thing. I think lawyers who do become entrepreneurs are highly technical and have an awareness of the broader needs of the end users and therefore know the problem really well so that they focus on how do we serve these end users. Like lawyers are all about service. We're all about how do we deliver the best outcomes? How do we do X so that the client benefits the most? And I think that's what makes us eventually, if we overcome some security issues and our reservations, good entrepreneurs because we're so focused on clients, we're so focused on the problem.
It's good to know. Yeah, because I think we live in a weird walk of life, right?
Yes.
Especially when it comes to legal technology, that I personally can't think of any other perhaps domain where you have the practitioners of that domain then go on to develop technologies to support that domain, right? Do you think that's because there's a low barrier to entry of legal technology compared to say like a fintech?
No, I don't think so. I think it's maybe because there are less people playing in it. There's less people kind of focused on solving problems there. It's a space where if you weren't working in legal, you don't even realize lawyers are suffering from these inefficiencies and these headaches. So I think it's a lack of awareness. Like consumer tech, for example, we all experience consumer tech. We all experience like these problems that we face day to day. Fintech also, we all deal with money, so we all know it. But for legal tech, unless you worked as a lawyer, you don't intimately know what these problems are and how it feels, and therefore why we want to spend our energy and time solving it.
No, it makes sense. Like, for example, when I moved into SaaS, Well, it wasn't even called SaaS back in the day, but technology, cloud, right? I started at a data room company, and so
Mm,
every person I spoke to, they were like, "What do you do?" And I was like, "I sell air," right? Because I was just like an easier way and be like, "Well, take a transaction. There's due diligence needs to be done around that transaction." Instantly lost people, right, in that process.
yep,
The
yep,
So talk to me about kind of the journey, right? Like I think that's where like I'm really keen for us to have this discussion. You mentioned you had a company before. What
yes.
kind of initially got you into this entrepreneurial
Oh,
environment?
gosh, I think for me it was a last grasp at something other than being like a full-time partner somewhere, right? So I had been working for a little bit a little bit over a decade as a lawyer
Mm,
by that time, and I was on the sort of partnership track at a firm. And instead of jumping straight into it, I could see the economic circumstance. I could see my numbers for the next year. So I was like, I'm going to take a year off. I'm going to do something a little bit different. Because as a M&A lawyer back then, a lot of my friends turned to me for advice, like, hey, how do they buy and sell this thing? What would they do if these things would happen? So
mhm,
I was giving a lot of kind of commercially natured advice to my friends anyway. And a part of me felt like I want to do that. I want to go in and dabble in building a business. So around 2020, sorry, 2015, 2016-ish, I had been working on a mobile app because mobile apps were all the rage back then, which helped people find events and things to do based on their preferences. So learning what they liked and then made recommendations. Netflix, but for the real world. And we went pretty well actually. After about 2 years of building, I left private practice. We launched it. We were getting traction in Sydney. We had about 10,000 users. And then 5 or 6 months after I finished up at the firm, um, Google and Facebook both launched their events apps.
okay.
And I was like, oh, I mean, that's startup kill zone right there between two giants.
Mm,
So I was going to go back to the firm, pick up where I left off. And by sheer accident, a friend of mine from high school, he was a data scientist in an NLP company.
yeah.
And so he came to me and said, hey, their NLP company in Germany just won a contract with one of the big four, and they're supposed to review these 10,000 leases. What's a lease? What are we looking
Mhm,
for?
mhm.
And so I spent a few hours with them talking them through the contract structure and what they should be looking for and how they can apply their NLP technology. This was prior to Transformers and the latest wave of like really cool tech. And yeah, from that, I was like, there's something here. We could be solving something really fundamental for lawyers.
Mhm.
And then that's when I got into Cynthia. That's a very long story.
Oh,
Sorry.
it's a good story, right? Because I think it gives context, right? And like life's about near misses, right? And circumstances. So what? So Cynthia, um, where did the name come from?
So honestly, at the time, it was because okay, so we went through a lot of iteration of names.
Sure.
And the worst one, I remember this distinctly. I sent an email to my friend, the data scientist, and I went, I got a great name. It's gonna be called Ali Oop, like the basketball thing, but it's gonna spell AI because we're helping lawyers get slam dunks.
There we go.
And then he was
Start.
like, yeah, he was like, maybe rethink that. And so we
Wow.
rethought it. And among the many names, we picked Cynthia. Cynthia at the time, we were like, we wanted to synthesize something from information. So
Gotcha.
Cynthia. But then afterwards, we kind of tinkered with it. We changed the spelling because what we ended up with was the Latin words for together and knowledge. Cynthia. That's how we ended up with this name and this weird spelling.
No, it's beautiful. Well, if it helps, I'm really dyslexic, so that was the correct spelling for me. So, but but so my always question with these type of things, right? Because I've been in this space a while, is like you kind of focus on I'm going to use the term AI broadly, right?
Mm,
Um,
mm.
so do you guys focus on kind of building data sets and models around contracts, or how do you kind of approach vast sums of documentation, like you mentioned when that Big Four had that requirement?
Yeah, so when we first started, that was one of the big challenges we had. Like, where do we focus? Because we had to build a model for everything.
Mm,
And at the time, what we decided was no, 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 there's a better way of doing this. And it's if we don't build any models at all.
yeah.
Technology wasn't quite there at the time. So we were being really novel. We were like, is there a way to use unsupervised machine learning to self classify, to self sort the information? And about a year after we started working, Google released their
Google
seminal paper on
Analytics, yeah.
transformers.
Hmm.
And we were like, there it is. They came up with the solution we've been working on. And so we started using large language models. So this is before the whole GPT era right now, right?
By a
We've
rule of
been
this podcast, we ain't talking about
oh,
ChatGPT. Well, we
Ipsnay,
can,
Ipsnay.
right? And we can ask it some stupid stuff around why Rob needs a job in sales and get scared about that. But yeah.
Yeah, look, yeah, save it for another time, I think.
Okay. Uh,
But yeah, so
um,
we came up with this kind of thing where we wanted to use machine learning in such a way that was much more flexible, much more self-supervised, and so we got very lucky by having one, a really strong data science partner, and two, a really strong lead data scientist internally, who worked with us to tailor these things for
okay.
legal.
Makes sense. Yeah. Data scientists are just geniuses at work, right? Like I've never met one that's not interesting, but you
Yeah.
could probably say
Yeah.
otherwise.
Oh no, I think that's generally true. I mean, data scientists are a different breed. They're trying to make sense of really difficult things using pure numbers.
Mm,
It's sort of like applied mathematics. Back in the old Greek days, it would have been like the Pythagoras, and that's the data scientists today.
love it. So like we kind of talked to where you got to where it all came to be, and with the huge volumes of unstructured data, right? And the ever increasing file types and data volumes and that type of thing. Like within your specific niche in our wonderful market, where do you think you see the kind of the iterations going over the next couple of years?
So we play in the contract data space,
Hmm.
and it's been a really hot area over the last couple of years. Everyone kind of started hiring data scientists. The law firms started talking about having a data practice,
Yeah.
and I think one of the fundamental challenges in this space that I think everybody realizes, but not many people are trying to solve, is that contract data is actually structured. It's semi-structured information. And I'm going to get a little bit technical here, so
Go for it.
apologies for deep diving a little bit. Um, it's this weird blend between pure natural language and maths formulas, right? Maths formulas are written out, this symbol means this, and it has to be used in this way. And these are operators that has a certain
Hmm.
procedure that has to be followed. Whereas natural language is you write whatever you want and you interpret it in real time. Contracts somewhere in the middle. They use definitions, they use very rigid structures,
Yeah.
especially outside of the US, where you have the clause structures and numbering and these bullet points. And so dealing with this type of data is a unique beast. And I think not many people are spending enough time thinking about how do you clean up this data to make it useful, to make it available in different use cases. So I suspect, and I know we said we won't talk about the Ipsnay word, but I suspect with generative AI
Mm.
coming to the forefront, everyone's going to start asking the question, yeah, but where did you get the data from?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that I think is where a lot of focus will be for the next 3 years. I don't know beyond that, but I think it's all about traceability and reliability of data.
Yeah. No, it does make sense. And like I said, I used to be in the basic contract automation world, right? So kind of taking it through from template to delegations of authority to sign off to milestone review, reporting, etc. And have you seen over the last couple of years as you work with the actual data within those documents, the quality being improved when people use a tool? Do you think there's different challenges? How have you kind of seen the last couple of years from an evolution of contract management perspective?
So I think from a contract management perspective, the quality has become more consistent.
Hmm.
Um, um, I don't think you get the wild swings of the old days where you get kind of rogue sentences inside of a clause, and you're like, "What is that doing there?" Because people are uh, properly structuring the information a lot more since document automation became a thing about 2 decades ago, maybe a decade and a half ago. Um, but I think what it's doing is it's freeing up lawyers' time to think about higher quality things. It's freeing up lawyers' time to actually prepare advice, to tailor their drafting where it's necessary. So what we've been seeing is um, maybe strangely, the length of contracts, I think, have increased in the last decade compared to before. People are drafting longer documents because they can use
Really?
templates.
Okay.
Um, um, and I think the overall quality is better because it's all more consistent.
Do, do you think consistent is better though? Do you think if contracts are getting
Hmm.
longer and more long-winded, like, and I know like it's an easy term to say consistency is better, right? But is the actual output improved, or is it just like tooling has helped us kind of get to a certain level, do you think?
We're talking about a highly fragmented market where different lawyers of different quality are all over the world. So it's all a
Sure.
bit of a, well,
Hodgepodge, as we say in the UK.
hodgepodge. Yes. But what I think, and this is entirely subjective, right? Just as my last answer is entirely subjective. What I think is it depends on your bell curve. If
Mm,
your bell curve of lawyer skills sits somewhere around here and you're able to lift that by having a bell curve of consistency that's a little above the middle, I think the overall experience for everyone is going up. But if you have these pockets of brilliance, like a lot of the top firms have amazing lawyers, and if they end up relying on these templates without really thinking about it, then they're going down because the
mm.
middle of the bell curve necessarily is below a magic circle. Um, so it really depends on where you're from, your circumstances. Because if you're a very busy in-house lawyer and you just don't have time to deal with 1,000 transactions by the end of the year,
Hmm.
template it, just pump it out because it's going to be predictable, it's going to be good. But that's my thinking.
It's also risk management, right?
Yes,
So I've worked with a lot of lawyers for a long time, right? And you guys, by nature, are risk averse. So,
we are.
so I think consistency leads to a reduction in risk, I think.
Yeah.
And because, hey, I used to be in sales and I used to have my own contract, and then if the client send me the red line, I'd be like, this all seems pretty good, just accept all of it. And then the lawyers are like, Rob, you know that we've signed this off for like unlimited liability. I'm like, yeah, but I've got my commission. So there's certainly those kind of those dotting of the i's and crossing the t's from a risk perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And it's so funny you say that because I think there's a lot of tension between lawyers and other groups inside the business community, right? Like sales and legal are your archetypical enemies inside of a company.
Mm.
And I think there's a sort of attempt at, and it's been going on for a while, an attempt where lawyers are saying, listen, we're not your enemies. We're trying to be facilitators. And part of I think the rise in legal tech, especially among the corporates, is it's giving visibility to the salespeople of what the lawyers are doing. It's helping them say, "Hey, I'm not your enemy. I'm your friend." Um, but yeah, it's a tricky space, and everyone's got their own view.
It is. I think there's always when we used to qualify these things out, right? And I'm sure you do the same. Is when we speak to corporates, we be like, who owns the contract, right? And
Mhm.
so contracts is also a bit of a weird world where you kind of almost have three buckets of owner. So you kind of have the sales team,
Mhm.
procurement, right?
Mhm.
And then either the individual business owner, operational owners, or legal, right? And so with my sales hat on, I'm like, I don't want to have anything to do with the risk in this contract. So legal own it, and legal are like, well, it's all commercial, so sales own it, right? And
Yep.
so, as you said, I think a really good thing for people to get to is almost that internal handshake of that contract. So
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
give you an example, I spoke to a GC last year, and basically he did a roadshow around the UK to all the sales functions around educating of the template that they've created, right? So basically you can change Appendix A and that is it, right?
Yep.
Everything
Yep.
else is, if you need to redline it, it goes through our CLM tool, through the delegations of authority. Don't worry about it. So I think, and again, that's because they are a regulated business, so they have to have those things in place. But where, like, do you think there is any specific industry that you guys really like excel in? So is it like real
Mm.
estate, or where do you think it's like prime for analytical data review tools?
Gosh, well, that's a really interesting one. So I can answer that in the last 6 to 12 months, where it's been really, really hot is funds and funds management.
Okay.
Um, for us, our tool is doing something which I think is a little bit unusual based on existing tools. I know you mentioned you worked at a certain company in recently as the sales person,
Mm,
and they're very much focused on this uh, the fund space as well, from what I understand.
mhm,
And we we are trying to create a tool that allows a lawyer to have a complete and comprehensive view of what's in their documents, and then being able to kind of line things up, search for things, find things as they need, right? But the key word there is comprehensive, because traditional machine learning is not very good at giving people a comprehensive view of contracts. It gives people what has been trained to give people. So if something hasn't been trained for, the machine's not going to find it. So any legal function which is spotting anomalies, which is spotting for the gaps, traditional machine learning doesn't really do a good job in. And so to answer your question of where I see the uptick, where I see
mhm,
the market going, I think it is going to be it's going to be used primarily, or rather, our software is going to be used primarily by lawyers looking for um, gaps, by lawyers looking for things that they may not find ordinarily using a template,
mm,
using traditional processes. So funds management, probably not like IT contract review, but banking documents, mergers and acquisition documents,
yeah.
the things that law firms tend to do more than in-house, I think.
Okay.
Um,
Makes sense.
but yeah,
Do you guys primarily focus on corporate or law firm? Where's your sweet spot?
historically law firms,
Hmm.
and that's not because we, you know,
Or lawyers?
chased after anything. It's more we're very much a sort of company that goes, well, what's the problem our users are experiencing? what
Hmm.
what is it that we want to solve for them? And because of my background as a lawyer, it was just easier for me to go, well, I understand this area, so I'm going to develop products for this area. And we are now starting to work with corporates, but what we're
Okay.
finding is their needs are very different.
Hmm.
Um, and it's different in these subtle and important ways. So we've been focused on law firms. We'll probably start branching into corporates, but we'll do so cautiously. We'll do so by understanding what we're solving first, so we make sure we have that very important thing, return on investment.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, right? Because again, um, in my career so far, I've sold to both law firms and corporates, and
Yeah, what
especially,
do you think? What's
yeah.
it like?
So it's a tricky one, right? Especially if I have my sales hat on, is
Yes.
that when you're selling either, say, a litigation tool or a database tool, you're kind of driven by transactional events, right? So, for example, there's an M&A deal happening, a data room needs to be created, that's a transactional event. Or
Yep.
I'm suing you, we need a new discovery tool. So an event,
Yep.
right? Probably not transactional, but strategic events probably the best term.
Yes. Yes.
In perfect world, you want to partner with a corporate, right? Because you sign one MSA, you can do some ARR or PLG or whatever kind of methodology you want to use, and you do a nice kind of quarterly business review, happy days, right? The problem with that, especially kind of in like non-US territories, is if we're talking litigation or M&A, right, is maybe the top 10 or 15 accounts are going to give you enough um, deals for it to warrant that process, right? So in theory, if you went to oil and gas company A, sold your product, brilliant, right? But again, everyone's trying to sell it.
Yep.
Side of the fence, law firms, right? So let's say you're working with their M&A team or their litigation team, they effectively exist because they are dealing with concurrent events all the time for their clients, right? So it's an easier sell to go to those guys because their legal litigation team are going, right, okay, we're supporting these guys in this litigation or whatever it may be, or data breach or whatever, right? So we need these tools and functions to support them, but they may do 50 to 100 a year, right? And so your client base is the law firm, but it's hard to build that relationship, especially because like a lot of these worlds are being kind of distorted by old school sales tactics, right? So I've had to buy a lot of coffees and steak in my life, but so that's the tricky thing. It's about kind of balancing that out because again, when we look to say like funding or valuation, like
Yep.
come like investors or funders, they want to see consistency in revenue. Um,
Yes.
and the problem you
Yes.
have with transactional events is like this, right?
Yep.
Um, so you need a two-pronged attack, in my opinion. And the corporate is the long, and again, you call it the whales, if you will, but you need kind of
Yes.
different levels of complexity in your sales process because, again, you need the little ones to keep the ship going, right? And then the big one, if you miss the big one, then obviously you've got other deals on the table. So that's how I think about it from a sales perspective. If that kind of does that make sense for us?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. So I used to work for a sales organization as well. They sold aerial imagery, and the way they divided up their team very much is between the SAMs, the strategic account managers,
Mm,
and sort of like sport and medium as well. And it's a system that makes a lot of sense. But I think so. Speaking as a legal tech startup, it is really hard to divide your energy in that way
mhm.
because they're two different groups looking for different types of functionalities. And so your product has to speak to both and resonate with both. And that's hard.
It's also two different skill sets, right? So, like, especially if you're kind of in that startup, kind of wanting to grow into a scale up mode, right? Is like, unfortunately, salespeople are really expensive, right? And what's
But
worse
they pay
is
for themselves, don't they? That's what I've been told.
probably in not so much in like mind, body, and soul, but the uh, but the problem is, right, is you look at two different sales cycles. So you have your strategic event sales cycle. So you bring in a salesperson, you give them a target, and then you reverse engineer that, and they may need, I don't know, like 100 opportunities, right?
Yep.
Um, so they are used to kind of like hitting the streets, knocking on doors, beating people, and it's more of that building that one-to-one relationship with the individual key decision makers within a firm. Great example, right?
Yep.
Whereas the corporate cycle is big ticket and a massive pain because quite often it's RFP driven, which I'm sure you've seen a lot of RFPs in your life and we all hate them, right? And so, and then you have to think about it strategically because if supermarket A sends us an RFP and I've never spoken to supermarket A, like to keep it very British, we ain't winning it, right? Because they either are doing a couple of things. So either kicking the tires because they want to get a cheaper deal off their existing provider,
Yep.
or procurement have got hold of it and they're just like They are the gatekeeper to the process.
Yep.
So if you want to speak to the GC, you don't want to tick off the procurement guys, even though the GC is the decision maker. So unless you don't have that relationship, it's impossible. But is that the same for you guys? Do you kind of get, what is your kind of
It's
philosophy towards RFP?
so it's interesting. We've only ever done two, I think, RFPs in our kind of company's lifetime.
Okay.
We've managed to gain our customers through word of mouth, so we're very lucky in that way. But the two RFPs we did, we actually put in a lot of effort
Yeah.
into answering the questions, like lots and lots of effort.
Mm.
And I remember, like, I don't remember what both of them. We didn't win either one.
Yes,
But
exactly right. So,
yeah, but I do remember one of them coming back with a comment that was something like, did not provide market data. And I was like, what? What does that even mean? We're not a listed company. We are a startup. There is no market data about us.
yeah, I've also met a lot of head of legal operations people who, after a few beers, admit never reading the damn things. Right, so that's even more soul destroying.
Oh.
Yeah, yeah. So when you grow your business, get an RFP team. That's my moral of the story. The yeah, it is a handy thing to have in the back pocket. But so so how so you guys as a business, right? Like
Yes.
where is the kind of the next frontiers for you guys? Is it to kind of start that kind of funding route or grow naturally? Like how are you seeing kind of the building of the business over the next year or so?
I tend towards building and growing naturally and
Hmm.
organically. And part of it comes back to this idea of traditional business, right? Like we don't want to just take someone's money and throw it all away trying to grow the business when there's not a good fit. What we want is to service customers, deliver value. And if that happens, customers will pay, customers will talk about us, and we will grow. So I remember speaking to a VC, this was like 2 years ago, maybe. And I told him this, and he said, so you're building a real business? And he was tongue in cheek about it.
Sure.
But yeah, that's what I think. Now, if the right funder were to come along and say, here's some money for this purpose, here's how we're going to help you. It's not just numbers on the page. We will be there with you and help you in some way, some tangible way. Very, very happy to bring someone like that on board. But I think it's not easy in 2023 to do that.
I think hopefully it will become easier, right? Because like a lot of family offices are going to get annoyed eventually that these guys aren't spending their money on something, right? But
Yep.
it makes complete sense. I've worked for like a myriad of companies, and the reality is when you take that investment, you have to be super selective,
Yep.
right? Because like it or not, it will change the culture and mentality of the business.
Mm.
Um, and so like I said, if you jump on that private equity train, for example, you do become a spreadsheet, if you like it or not, right? And
Yep.
so the cultural piece does kind of, erode is probably a strong word, but like it's all about what for example, the annual recurring revenue of that business is, and are we keeping the investors happy? But I actually think going into this year and beyond, because everyone's getting more selective and picky, even on the owner side, so your side, like I think the strategic relationships will be better from an investment perspective, right? Because you'll be like,
Yeah.
okay, the cash is nice, but we want experience on how we get to 10x our ARR currently, or we want
Yes.
to understand who else in your portfolio is a good brother or sister business to what we do, right? So I think it's about those additional values. Would you say?
I would 100% agree. I would 100% agree. And on top of that, I think because these relationships will take time to build,
Mm.
it will give the founders, it will give the startups an opportunity to really reflect on what they're offering. Um, and I think the core the core benefit of this is we will know ourselves better and we'll know our customers better. which I think when money's free and being thrown around, that gets missed.
Yeah, I agree because people see like a check and they're like, sweet, right? Um,
Yeah.
okay. I suppose my last question is, what do you think we could do as a legal tech community better? Like, because again, it's an ever-growing landscape. Like, do you think that the relationships to um, business to business integration, API, exchange of data needs to improve? Do you think we need to be doing a better job at kind of co-selling, like selling the value to clients? Where do you think where's your frustrations lie in our market?
Gosh, all of the above.
Where to start?
But where to
Okay,
start? Where
where
to
to start?
start? Um, my key frustration is I think there's a lot of unnecessary competition. And what I mean by unnecessary competition is a lot of legal tech companies claim to do things that their technology is not really well suited to do, right? And
Mhm.
so what it does is it dilutes the messaging to the market, and also it means there's a lot of competition when they shouldn't really be there.
Yeah.
Whereas if we all focused on what we do well and we helped each other, and I'm such a strong supporter of legal techs can help each other, and we should.
Mhm.
We all win because we go in there and say, hey, our solution's not the best one for this, but if you want to do X, talk to these guys. They will solve it for you. And at some point, maybe way in the future, these other guys that we recommended would say, oh, if you're trying to solve that, talk to, whoever. And that I think will create a better community, because we're all trying to solve different things. We're all trying to ultimately help our customers, and we're not helping them if we claim to do things beyond what we actually do.
Shots fired.
So shots. No, it wasn't meant to be. It wasn't meant to
No,
be.
no,
Um,
I do understand where you come from, right? About it's all about kind of paying it forward. I think it's the key
yeah,
thing, right? Like, I think half of being a good either sales representative or owner is about when you're speaking to the client, understanding their issues as a whole rather than as a singular, right? Because again, again to use some tools, especially kind of in the data extraction AI piece, they kind of need their house in order in certain areas, right? Um, and so often whenever I sell tech is like it's understanding about how can we solve your problems upstream, right?
yeah.
Because and again, it's not about kind of shafting them for cash. It's about when you get to us, we want you to be in the best position possible where you're not
Right, right.
being charged an absolute ton of cash for an inefficiency because you had a poor data retention schedule 13 months ago, right? So as I say, I think it's about working as a collaborative for a greater good. It's probably a good term.
Exactly. Exactly. And I'll add to that, where we genuinely do have a competitor, where we genuinely are competing for a customer,
Mm.
what I say to customers, and you can ask any of our customers whether I've said this, is you pick the best for you. We offer different things, and depending on your needs, go with the one that makes sense. Don't just pick us because we bought you a coffee.
Well, depends who pays my expenses, but yeah, I get it. I get it in theory. But yeah, absolutely. Like I said, it's if you're honest to the process, then people remember that, right? Because ultimately, like our world is so small, like so
Yep.
small, and especially as there is always acquisitions of businesses going along. There's hilarious stories, right, about people upsetting people, then the company getting acquired, all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And the clients know about it. So if you shaft a client and they move to a new company and you try and sell to them, they ain't gonna be interested. But
Reputation. It's all about reputation.
reputational cost. Yeah, I agree. But Horace, thank you so much for your time, man. Really appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's been a joy.
Speak to you later. Bye bye.
Bye.